from Mexico.
My mother's last name is Lopez. She's from Guatemala.
We're proud of the dreams not just of ourselves and our people, but the dreams of this nation.
We explore it all on CBS Deportes El Poder, streaming Thursday, October 13th.
France and the United States have always stood together, and I can say that President Macron and I have stood together since we worked together.
159 counties in Georgia are offering early voting ahead of the December 6th runoff.
We need to get somebody in Washington with common sense and know you don't spend what you don't have.
Herschel Walker was a great running back, and we're getting ready to send him running back to Texas.
I never saw, all the way through January 6th, evidence of widespread fraud in any state that would change the outcome.
The campaign continues. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with the Senate passing legislation to avoid a rail strike. The resolution passed with bipartisan support, 80-15. It now heads to the White House for the president's signature. The House passed legislation yesterday to ratify an agreement that the Biden administration helped to broker back in September. If a deal wasn't approved by December 9th, it would have likely led to a rail workers' strike that would have led to a devastating impact on the economy. So joining us now for more on all of this is senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, joining us from the North Lawn of the White House. Ed, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So how is the White House reacting to news of this passing the Senate? Did they get what they wanted?
They did, Caitlin, because the Congress helps now avert what would have been a devastating strike. It would have crippled the U.S. economy, certainly almost immediately, with about $2 billion in losses every day. The president asked for this essentially on Monday and got it here by Thursday. That is lightning speed by congressional standards these days. But there was an understanding that in order to allow industries that rely on rail shipments to fulfill their plans to ship goods next week, it had to be done by the end of this week. Things like grain and other food that gets shipped from agricultural states, the chemicals that help keep our water clean and safe, coal, of course, and gasoline, big items that are needed by Americans in order to sustain the economy. There have been threats of 750,000 people potentially losing their jobs if these rail workers had been allowed to go on strike. Congress steps in, taking advantage of a law that allows them to avert railroad strikes dating back to the early 20th century at least. They've done this now 19 times in U.S. history, stopping railroad workers from striking. The president admitted repeatedly and in his statement today that he was reluctant to do this. He is, or he likes to say, he is the most pro-union president, at least in modern times, but that the perfect couldn't outweigh the good, and the good was a pretty decent deal cut for these railroad workers, brokered in part by the Biden administration back in September, that gives them a 24% pay increase over 5 years, sustains what's called the two-man crew, or the two people that go out on the rails and do a lot of the maintenance work and other services along the rails, something that the railroad companies had gone after, and then made other improvements to benefits and whatnot. But what 4 of the 12 unions involved had been seeking was at least 7 days of paid leave, and they had rejected that agreement reached in September, saying they wanted to see that happen. Privately, some of these union officials would tell you they knew this was a really great deal, and they were wagering that with a pro-union president and a really pro-union labor secretary, Marty Walsh, who's a former union boss, perhaps they could convince Congress and the White House to give them those 7 days of paid leave. It didn't happen. And then in a statement during his press conference with French President Emmanuel Macron earlier today, the president made clear he'll keep fighting for paid leave.
I think we're going to get it done, but not within this agreement. Not within this agreement. We're going to avoid the rail strike, keep the rails running, keep things moving, and I'm going to go back and we're going to get paid leave, not just for rail workers, but for all workers.
The president got a little piqued by the question, which was in essence saying, you know, if you're so supportive of paid leave, how come you didn't give it to these rail workers? He said, look, they'd gotten all these other things. This is one of the only countries in the industrialized world that doesn't have paid leave. He'll make it he vowed to keep fighting for it for those workers and for all American workers, Caitlin.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, Ed, and that seems like an uphill climb on the hill. Reason why it didn't get included or wasn't voted for in this iteration. How involved does the president plan to be in that, or is the sense that they were able to avert this rail strike and have to move on to other issues?
It's more likely to be the latter. And the administration was pretty closely involved since the spring. The Labor Secretary, Transportation and Agriculture Secretaries, all in one way or another involved in this, keeping the parties at the table. As I said, Walsh, the former mayor of Boston, was a union boss before that, and he directly oversaw the final days of the negotiations over this tentative agreement. The president then brought some of those officials here to the White House and called it a great deal for America. And the hope was that they would agree to this deal before Thanksgiving. But 4 of the 12 unions involved in all this had held out, seeking more, and yet they understood the broader economic implications, and at least leadership of those unions understood, maybe not all the rank and file, that they'd gotten a pretty good deal here, and they'll keep fighting as they have now for 5 decades to get paid leave. That was one of the striking things I learned this week, Caitlin, in our reporting on this, talking to one of the union leaders, that for 52 years roughly they've been fighting to try to get paid leave. And railroad companies have stood in the way, arguing that they have all these other benefits, that they can take time off if needed for other reasons, but they argue they deserve some paid leave as well.
Yeah, and Ed, I also want to ask about a big visit to the White House from French President Emmanuel Macron. Can you give us a sense of this, the importance of this relationship, the idea that President Biden chose this for his first state visit, what they discussed today, and any sticking points they may have?
Yeah, you'd think it's Christmas in Paris here, where you see the French flag here behind me hanging on the windows along with the wreaths. This is the first state visit of a world leader during the Biden presidency. He chose America's oldest ally to reinforce that relationship and say thank you to a country that's been pretty involved, especially with the war in Ukraine. The two leaders discussed a host of issues, including what to do about Ukraine and Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Macron has made clear throughout this conflict that he prefers keeping an open line of communication with Putin, if anything, to avoid catastrophe at some of those nuclear plants in Ukraine, for example. The president, of course, has said he's not meeting, and he said it again today, not meeting with Putin unless or until he agrees to start withdrawing forces and find a peaceful solution to end this conflict. So they part ways on that, but they certainly stand firm in supporting Ukraine. Another interesting development that had sort of percolated in the last few weeks comes out of the Inflation Reduction Act, which this program, and you and I and our colleagues in the Bureau have spent so much time covering over the last year and a half. Massive climate change, health care, inflation reduction legislation passed over the summer. Remember that it includes subsidies for U.S.-made electric vehicles. Well, Macron came here to Washington and yesterday called those subsidies, quote, strongly aggressive against European firms that are concerned about getting, knocked back by what some would call almost protective tariffs on European countries. President acknowledged today that there are some tweaks that need to be made to the language of that massive bill to reassure Europe that they're not being penalized in any real way for continuing to do what they do in terms of electric vehicles and semiconductors and other industries. But he defended the legislation, saying, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to bolster the American economy. Beyond that, there was discussion of other issues, including upcoming summits next year, dealing with Africa and the rest of the developing world. Both France and the U.S., of course, are active patrons of many of those countries.
A key alliance indeed. Ed O'Keefe from a seasonally decorated White House North Lawn. Thank you.
Take care.
And January 6th Committee Chair Benny Thompson says he believes the panel conducted its last interview on Wednesday, and a final report is expected later this month. CBS News confirmed the DOJ has reached out to former Vice President Mike Pence in the department's ongoing investigation into the events surrounding January 6th and the 2020 presidential election. The former vice president has received the request and is reviewing it. And for more, let's bring in Mark Short. He's the former chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence. Good to see you. I want to ask a little bit about the DOJ investigation to January 6th. Do you think that the former vice president will talk with prosecutors?
Caitlin, I really have to refer that question to Pence's lawyer, Emmett Flood, for questions about that.
I know that you have spoken to them, though. Would you advise the former vice president to speak to them?
You know, I think that there are really profound questions about speech and debate clause here. But I also think that the reality is that the vice president understands that there's a difference between a January 6th congressional investigation where, he felt very strongly about a separation of power and that there was not the same sort of, that having served in Congress for 12 years, he knew what the role of Congress was, and sort of investigations that don't have criminal aspects to them are different than a DOJ investigation. But I also think, that there is concern about naming a special counsel at this point. And I think, when Merrick Garland wants to portray this as if there's an independent special counsel detached from DOJ, they've been doing this investigation for 2 years, Caitlin. It's not like it's a brand new investigation. They're pretty far down a path. And so it seems like a pretty strong deflection to sort of push this now on to saying whatever comes forward is a special counsel's decision and not owned by DOJ.
But I guess the main difference between a congressional one and a federal one is that you couldn't essentially evade it, or you're suggesting that Pence would be maybe more inclined to participate with the federal investigation.
I don't want to suggest, because I really think that's a conversation between DOJ and Pence's lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer, but there is definitely, as you say, there's a difference between a investigation from Congress that is more information gathering versus something that could become a criminal investigation.
I want to ask about this latest controversy surrounding the former president and his dining with Nick Fuentes and Kanye West. Kanye West, of course, went on Alex Jones' conspiracy show today, going on another anti-Semitic rant. You have said that the former president has kind of gone into the heart of darkness, as you described it. As the former vice president is looking at all of this, do you think that he may be more compelled to run because of these latest controversies?
Oh, I don't think that factors into a decision. I think the vice president himself has commented about his disappointment that the president had entertained these folks at Mar-a-Lago, and I think you've heard him call for the president to apologize for having such anti-Semitic rhetoric there expressed by those individuals. But I don't think that factors into decision. I think as he looks at what is next and where he can be called to serve, he's more interested in what the American people are saying, what he's hearing and what they're looking for in leadership. And I think that what he hears consistently is an affection for the Trump-Pence policies, but looking for a different type of leadership that can unite this country.
Do you think that, given the criticisms of the former president and Republicans trying to figure out a way to move beyond him, when you're looking at the 2024 field, do you think it would benefit Republicans to rally around one candidate early and avoid kind of a wider field? Or do you think that a lot of people should jump in?
I think that often we here in D.C. try to game board this. And I think the reality is that the voters will choose. And I think that nothing really matters until you actually begin the process, begin getting into debates and getting feedback from voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, across the country.
Speaking of those states, does the former vice president have plans to visit?
He's visited them many times, this year, and it was part of the book rollout that he's excited, the success he's enjoyed with that. He'll be doing book signings in New Hampshire and South Carolina in the next couple of weeks.
And any sort of timeline about when he will make this decision?
No, I don't think there's an artificial timeline for him. I think, as he's mentioned, that he and his family will gather over the Christmas holiday and talk about the future that they see and where they think they can be called to serve the American people.
And what exactly would be his path if he were to run?
I'm not sure that I accept the notion that there's like a specific path for people. Again, I think we here in D.C. were sort of often provided these sort of forums, or people around town are paid to do that. But I think the reality is that it's more about where the American people are calling and what they're looking for. And as he travels, he hears people saying, we love the policies. We're looking for different leadership that can unite our country because we're actually not as divided as the politics in D.C. are.
I mean, in that sense, do you think the book tour has kind of given him a sense of support, a sense of a constituency?
I think the book tour has been great because I think he viewed, ending his term as vice president, that it's appropriate for people to step back from the public eye for a bit. And the book tour has allowed him to come back out and do a lot of interviews and talk to the American people about what he's hearing and what he offers them.
All right, Mark Short, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
A former president is in the Peach State as a much-anticipated Georgia runoff comes closer to an end. We've got the latest on the final campaign push in the Walker-Warnock face-off. Straight ahead, you're streaming Red and Blue.
original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became a sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
When weather turns extreme.
States from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
Oh! You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it.
CBS mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it! Let's go!
CBS mornings, starting at 7.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. Former President Barack Obama is in Georgia to build support for Senator Raphael Warnock in the final days of the runoff voting. Obama previously rallied for the Democratic incumbent in the Peach State last month, and tomorrow is the final day for early voting in Georgia. Election day for the closely watched race between Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker is only 5 days away. So for more, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joining us from Atlanta. Hey, Nicole, you're back in Georgia. How critical does the Warnock campaign see this visit from Obama? What are they trying to get out of it?
Well, if you hear the music behind me, they're trying to hype people up, in short, and they want to hype them up to vote. Obviously, we have seen a robust turnout in early voting. Roughly 1 million people or more have cast their ballots so far, even though this has been a truncated early voting period and a truncated runoff. But this really is about trying to drive that turnout in these final days before the election. They feel that that was very effective during the general election when former President Obama came down, and so that is why you are seeing Senator Warnock bring him out yet again, because at the end of the day, this is really about turning out your base. And so as far as the campaign is concerned, there's no one better to do that than the former president.
And Nicole, going into this race, there was a thought that this would be the seat that could determine control of the Senate. The Senate has been determined. Democrats are remaining in control. But how are both campaigns factoring that in this final push?
You know, it has shifted the argument a little bit, although some of the arguments are still the same. You know, in terms of Senator Warnock's argument, he continues to argue that Herschel Walker is not fit for office, and that continues to be his refrain, but also encouraging his supporters to back him again because of his record, but also to ensure that Democrats have that one-seat majority, that will give them an opportunity to carry out a Democrats' agenda more effectively. On the flip side, Herschel Walker does continue to tie his opponent, Senator Warnock, to President Biden, saying that if he gets in office again, he's just going to be a rubber stamp for the president. But also Republicans really feel that if they are able to win this seat, that even if it is a 50-50 Senate, evenly divided, and Republicans are still in the majority, that's going to make things a lot tougher for Chuck Schumer. And also looking ahead to 2024, it's going to be a much harder landscape for Democrats to navigate. And so if they can deprive Democrats of one seat now, that just gives them more of an advantage come 2024.
Yeah, that could make a big difference, even just that one seat. And Nicole, among voters that you've been talking to and people on the ground here, I'm curious kind of how they are looking at this race. Are people feeling fatigued, or, you know, you mentioned those early voting numbers that suggest that people are still pretty animated about this contest?
Yeah, and I think that is a general sense among voters. You know, Senator Warnock's slogan has been, you know, let's do it one more time, you know, in terms of trying to motivate his base. But, you know, in talking to voters on both sides of the aisle, look, they understand the importance of this race. They understand that the country continues to watch Georgia, and they feel very passionately about this contest, at least those who are turning out. They feel that it is important to support their candidate, whoever that might be. But ultimately, while some voters may be fatigued, they still see the significance of getting out there to vote.
Well, I'm sure they appreciate getting this out of the way before the holidays. Nicole Killian from Atlanta, thank you so much. And Iowa has long been considered the king of caucuses, but that could change in the future. We're diving into which states could be vying for the top spot as Democrats look ahead to 2024. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. These migrants, they've been released. Explain the status that allows them to be released, to slow things down a little bit. What are the big sets of questions for China and its ambitions? Hackers are stepping up their attacks to extort victims. Let's start with easy. Who's attacking? Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Prime Time with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, they are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
States from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
people from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When it comes to the money you spend every day, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women. What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done? We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. The Democratic Party could shake up which states go first on the presidential primary calendar. The DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee is meeting tomorrow to discuss making changes to the order. In previous years, Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada have been at the top slots, but multiple states, including Michigan and Minnesota, are now jockeying for that first-in-the-nation status. So for more on this, let's bring in CBS News reporter Sarah Ewald-Weiss, who joins us now at the desk. Sarah, good to see you. People think about bylaws and rules committee and may kind of start to snore, but this is actually important because this is determining which states will go first in picking a president. So what's kind of the latest? Where do things stand?
Yeah, so this is actually a process that we do see every single presidential cycle. It's getting more attention this year because obviously, they're thinking of shaking up the order of these states. And keep in mind, Iowa and New Hampshire have been the first two states since 1972. So this would be a big deal when you look at the grand scheme of things. But essentially what happened is in April, this committee put together kind of what they're thinking of the criteria for this. And the things they were focused on is diversity in the state, feasibility of even holding the contest, and then competitiveness. Democrats want to be having these contests where there's so much focus so early on in states that are competitive in the general election. And then the other thing that they thought of is maybe we'll add a fifth state. So there's also the possibility there'll be a fifth early state in that early state window. So these states essentially started competing and lobbying. They had efforts where they were creating videos. They had lawmakers from these states coming in and lobbying to be one of the first states. And this process really played out in June where they made their presentations. We thought there could be some decisions made over the summer, but then it was kicked back till after the midterm. So now we're in the process where they'll gather, they'll have their conversations, they'll make their recommendations, and then those states will then go to the DNC for a full vote. Two states that have come up in this is Michigan, for one. It had a really good midterm for Democrats. And then Minnesota, both of those had huge active lobbying efforts. Members I spoke to said those are the front runners for moving up into this early window of states. And then the other state to keep an eye on, Nevada. Nevada has the backing of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus PACs. They talk about it in terms of diversity. It already is an early state, but it could be one of the first states now as opposed to third as it was last cycle.
And what's so interesting, too, is this week you had the Democratic caucus in the House unveil their new leadership slate, a younger, more diverse set of leaders, but they're also from coastal states. And the big, criticism of Iowa, or the big criticism of Democrats has been that they have not been paying attention to kind of rural voters. Do you get the sense that that is being considered in all of this? And on the flip side, does Iowa really have a history of picking the eventual winner?
With Iowa, it's really been hit or miss on whether they actually pick a winner. Obviously, Joe Biden did not win the Iowa caucuses in the most recent caucuses. It did, however, pick Barack Obama as the nominee, and then he went on to become president. So that obviously is one where they did have success there. There has been a lot of criticism because I even reported about it in Iowa during the caucuses, that Iowa is 90% white. And so there was criticism it's not diverse, it doesn't reflect the party. However, there is also the conversation that, Iowa has those rural voters, and the Democratic Party is leaving those rural voters behind. So some have said that they need to keep it a part of this early process because it does reflect that aspect of the party. Maybe it'll move back in the order, but still be an early state. It doesn't seem very likely right now, but we'll find out this week. But no, it really does come down to this criteria and really focused on the diversity and bringing in some new ideas and looking at where they need to be for the general election.
And of course, if Biden runs for re-election, then this may all be moot, but we will keep an eye on and see where we might be headed in 2024 as well. Sarah, you always, thank you very much for being here. And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
When folks on the right talk about socialism, it's a boogeyman.
Socialists are always going to promise you free tuition, free healthcare, free everything, but they will never promise you freedom.
I think of socialism